Meet Esteban Tremblay, one of Canada's top competitors in sport karate who brings the same success to the United States. In this episode, we explore how Esteban navigates the pressures of competition while adding his own creative abilities. Today, may I please welcome one of sport karate's brightest stars, Esteban Tremblay. So Esteban, kind of walk me through your first encounter with martial arts.
So I was basically born in martial arts, okay? So my mom and my dad have a karate school. So as soon as I was born, I was passing my day with them at the school. So yeah, that was my first encounter with martial arts. Just like my parents have to have me with them. So they brought me to the karate school. And then it's just like it felt natural to join the class when I was older and stuff like that. And then around 5 years old, I took my first tournament. And then, so yeah, I started like really, really early because of my parents. But I found in love with the sport. And yeah, I started from there.
That's interesting. You're one of the few people that I know that actually started from like day one, basically, of living, which is like kind of cool. So like, how did you go through that? Like, kind of walk me through like every belt and then black belt. Like, what was it like the experience?
Well, I think every kid that start martial arts have that goal of getting that black belt. For me, it was kind of different. For some reason, it was kind of nice to be a color belt for a while because, first of all, both of my brothers and my sister were black belts already. So it was like I was different, So that was a thing. And especially with the NASKA circuit that I started in 2010, I was doing all the circuit in the color belt. So that was an experience for me. Like I didn't want to level up and get my belts too early because otherwise I would like mess up my NASKA year because I would change division and stuff like that. So there was actually some year that I was waiting to do the testing for my brown belt and then black belt, just because I wanted to finish the NASKA year as a color belt. So yeah, around like 3 years old, started martial arts. Then not exactly sure. I don't remember. I was so young. I'm not exactly sure of the timeline between between the white belt to like blue belt. But I was about 6 to 7 years old. And then around that time, I did 2 to 3 full year as a color belt in NASKA. And then around 2014, I think was my first year as a black belt. And that year as well, I earned my black belt as well with my parents at their school.
Okay. So you kind of like were like basically like not like thrown into martial arts, but like it was such a big part of your life that you just knew this was going to be like my thing a bit essentially. So what made you go from martial arts is pretty cool, I'll like definitely do it, parents are into it, family's into it, to let's pick up the bow staff, like let's see what's happening with that, like why the bow staff specifically?
But it's funny enough that you say that like I was like already into it and stuff like that. And I was, and that's why I fell in love in the sport. But funny enough, when I was like 6 years old, at some point I told my dad straight up, I was like, I'm done. I'm not doing karate anymore. And he was like, not karate. I said I don't want to compete anymore. I was still doing the class and stuff like that, but I like, nah, competing is not for me. And like 6 months later, I came back and was like, yeah, I want to compete again. So like, they never forced me to do karate, and I think that's part of the reason why I'm so motivated to just from a young age just work every day and get better and better and better. But yeah, for the bow, actually my first weapon was kama. That's why I'm so used to just play around with kama, and that's why as soon as went to the adult, I started doing creative blade as well. But bow, I think it's mainly the influence of the top competitor of that time, of that era. So seeing Corey Lucas, then Jackson on stage and stuff like that, it's just like the bow was just like a crazy weapon to watch, and I was like, oh, I want to do that as well. And that was my first approach. And then worked with my parents at first, a little bit with my brother as well. Switched from comma to bow, and then started NASKA as a black belt with bow. And really, really young, as soon as I saw how hard the black belt division were in NASKA, I was like, yo, I need to step up my game. So I reached out to Jackson, and then since then, Jackson's been my coach, and we've been training together like every tournament, every month, sometimes online, sometimes in person at events and stuff like that. So he's really that person. He's really the person who put my bow to another level.
Yeah, because how I was introduced to like NASKA and like sport karate was through watching Jackson Rudolph's flow system when I was a little kid. And then you can see that obviously I interviewed him eventually, and then now you're like a product of Jackson in some degree. Like, this is what Jackson Rudolph did. Now let's see what Esteban's up to, bringing his own flavor.
And it's fun because it come back even like longer from that, because Jackson got teached by Lauren Kearney, and Lauren got teached by Casey, and Casey got teached by Mike. So it's just like a lineage of bow in the sport. It's just funny to like think about it. It's like Mike, then Casey, then Lauren, then Jackson, and then now it's me. And then who's next? We don't know.
Whoever's watching, that may be you. So what was that like major tournament or that major moment that you thought that you were actually like, oh, I could be good at bow staff?
Let's see. Because I had it's so, because I don't think that it's one tournament specifically. I think it's just a progress. I was like, okay, that's my weapon. And by the way, when I was young, I started first with bow, but at some point I pivoted to double bow. And then I went back to single bow. So what happened was I did single bow. I was kind of good with it. And then I started get some first place and stuff like that, but nothing major. I did get some world title at Waco World Junior. And then when I really wanted to stand out a little bit more in NASKA, that's where I tried double bow for a really long time. I even took some private lesson with Reed. And then at first I was doing all the division with double bow. And I felt like, especially with tricking and stuff like that, I felt a little bit restricted. And then I was like, why not do both? So I started doing double bow, and then at some point I was doing some division with double, some division with single. Sometimes in the grand I was doing single bow, and sometimes I wasn't doing double bow. But at the end of the day, my results when I was getting older, I was that much stronger with single bow that I just realized that, okay, I need to stick to single bow and let out the double bow. So I think like it's not necessarily one tournament that made me realize that like single bow would be my thing, but just the progress overall to see how my single bow perform over double. That made me just realize, okay, that's my weapon. We need to rock it.
I was gonna say, because I'm a comma guy. Like I started with commas and I just fell in love with it. And I was watching like Reed Presley growing up, and then Jackson, and then Reed threw out the double bow, and I'm like, I can't even do one. How are you supposed to do two while still make it cool? And then I saw a video of like Reed doing like a bead twist or some crazy like 540 with a bow in his hand while he's doing a trick, and I'm like, how are you supposed to do that? Like honest truth. And I think you're kind of saying that double bow was great, but I can be better with a single bow. And it seems like that paid off, right?
Yeah, it was. I felt like it was easier for me to just come out with new concepts. No specific reason, but just overall it felt better for me just to play around with the weapon, try to find new concept with tricking wise, with the bow, stuff like that. And I was working a little bit more with Jackson overall, even though I was doing double bow. So, he's the guy for single bow. So I ended up just like following that path as well.
So then how did you end up at Paul Mitchell eventually? Like kind of like walk me through from meeting Jackson, getting some guidance and mentorship from him, to Paul Mitchell's my new like school that I'm representing. Like walk me through that.
So I got on the team right after the pandemic. But of course, Paul Mitchell was my dream team since I started competing. And like it was from a really young age. And funny enough, the tournament at Diamond where Colin Shoka retired, I was a little kid. I didn't know it was happening. And I'm always telling everybody that story. The emotion of that in the room when he finished his form, even though I was so little and I didn't know what's going on, I could still feel that like it was something important. Like it was so weird. The atmosphere in the room was like tense at the end of his form. And even if I was like a little kid, being there felt like, okay, that's in the legacy now. What's going on? And like I was like 6 years old, 7 years old, and I still remember being there in the crowd watching that performance just because of that. And just like seeing him on Paul Mitchell and be like, okay, if you're on that team, you can create those kind of like memories. I'm like, dang, I want to create that at some point, So, of course, being mentored by Jackson also helped me follow that path and everything. And then I started doing really good the year before the pandemic. And it's no secret to anyone. If you want to get on Paul Mitchell, you need to have the results. If you don't have the results, you can do what you want, but you're not gonna get on the team. You have to be a good performing competitor, be on stage, get those wins. So yeah, right before the pandemic, I was there. I was getting the ISKA title. I was getting those diamond ring, getting on stage really often, running the grands, basically every tournament in weapon. But then everything shut down. It was kind of weird. And we knew nothing about what was going on with Paul Mitchell. And then out of a sudden, we come back. 2022 was a hard year for me because I saw my teammate Ben and Dawson compete at the U.S. Open, but I wasn't allowed to go there because the border were closed. So I was stuck at home watching them compete on my computer while I could do nothing. So that was really hard because I was like, still thinking of Paul Mitchell back then, And they were competing, they were winning, and I was at home doing nothing. I was training, of course, but I couldn't do a thing. So it really motivated me to like, when I was able to come back, the first tournament I came back was 2022 Diamonds. And I came back so strong, we didn't even see that I stopped for an entire year of competing. Because I was so motivated of seeing Ben and Dawson on stage and for me being locked up at home and could do a thing. And then I had a really good tournament going to AKA, and then it happens. I got the call, like a regular Sunday, just being with my family and stuff like that. I got the call, probably the best day of my life. And then here we are.
I know you're originally from like Canada. That's where you are. But do you commute to every tournament from Canada, or do you have like a place in the U.S.?
No, I every tournament I travel from Canada to the U.S. So right now I live close to Montreal. I stay here, and every tournament is traveling to the U.S. and then come back, and then go back to the U.S. and then come back.
I'm originally from Maryland, so then whenever I would go out of state, I'll be like, oh, this is a big deal. Like, we're spending a lot of time here. But then I hear you're like, oh, yeah, I'm like crossing the border, and like that's a whole new level of dedication. Because I grew up in a different organization. It's called the AAU, Amateur Athletic Union, and they were more focused on, okay, all the major schools are in like these little hubs. Let's try to like cater to those hubs. But then I had friends that go into like the U.S. Open, AKA, like Chicago, Diamonds, all of that. And they were saying like, oh, you gotta travel. Like that's where like, if you're willing to travel, that's where the real competition is. And it's true. Like I saw you at the DC Classic and you kicked it, like you destroyed it. And it really showed to me is like, oh, it's worth traveling because you can really see who's the best out of everyone who's willing to do it. So kind of speaking of that Capital Classic like instance, I saw that you did end up dropping the bow staff, once. What was that feeling like, and how did you kind of move forward from that and just try to improve to the next bracket, to the next tournament?
To be fair, it's never a good feeling to drop, but I always end up trying to take that feeling of dropping or just not winning a division and just take that as a fuel to just work harder, you know. Stuff happened at Caps, but what can we do besides just working harder and just get back to Diamond and dominate again, you know? So it felt weird, especially on the trick I dropped, because it's not something that I dropped on. Like, it's not even something hard for me. It's really just a pass that where it slides on my back and then I just catch it down. Like, it's not something that even in practice, I never dropped on that trick. So, like, doing it on stage and dropping on that was a little bit devastating because I was like, how is that even a thing? But at the same time, it just made me realize I underestimated that trick. That's why I dropped. If I would have taken more precaution, I would have analyzed a little bit more the motion and everything around the trick, I would probably not drop it. So it's for me, when a mistake like that happened at a tournament, it's really about trying to improve from that. You got a mistake, it's okay. Take the mistake away and try to find what went wrong and then just improve for the next tournament.
Was your mindset always like that? Like, as a kid, like, okay, that happened. Let's take these extra measures. Let's try to see like what went wrong. Like, are you always like that as a human being, or that was something you had to like evolve over time with your mindset?
I would definitely say evolve, because as a kid, I would say it's really it's hard to like see that progress. But a person who really helped me go through all of that is Jackson, because Jackson competed like his entire life, and he was able to tell me, like, after a drop, he came to me and was like, you know, it's not the end of the world. You know what went wrong, and just like work on it harder. I was like, okay. So he implanted me that mindset. And because of that, I was just like evolving through my years of competing, and I could improve more with my mistake instead of just be sad about it.
I would always think, oh, I dropped. Let's go run and see the footage. Like, that's like my instant like thinking, you know? And then you see like, oh, I didn't do this, or I didn't pivot enough, or I didn't do blah, blah, blah. But it seems like, I don't know if that's just like a trickers or a martial arts mindset. They always take it as like a stepping stone. Like, that had to happen to make sure I got better. And I feel that you're kind of agreeing with me that that drop or like something similar in any other situation needed to happen to know, like, okay, this is when you really got to dial in.
But my point of view for that is that if you were to go to the entire circuit, let's keep the NASKA circuit, for example, and from AKA to Diamond, you hit every form without any mistake, and you win every tournament. If you do that, well, first of all, you must be great at some point. That's you cannot deny that. But if nothing happens, there's not a lot of chance. There's not a lot of chance that you're gonna change something in for, and there's not a lot of chance that you're gonna work harder on it, because you feel comfortable. You create a safe space. But when those little mistakes, or you lose a division or stuff like that, and you know you're supposed to be on top, it shakes something up there, you know? So it bring that motivation, that dedication to just make sure it doesn't happen. So what you do after that is that, yeah, of course, a mistake is not a thing that you want to happen, but you should be glad that it happened, because it's just going to push you to go and make that form even better, create a new concept, go over, work some idea, and make sure it doesn't happen, and you win the next time.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So then, were you always like a tricker or martial arts tricker at all times, or were you just like the traditional, like I do karate, I do taekwondo, I do the regular forms, very traditional, and you eventually became more of like an extreme, like musical extreme division, or like kind of walk me through on like the pivot, or were you always a tricker?
Okay. It's kind of a mix of both, because in my school, we do have a traditional background. Um, Normal at first we call our school. We said that our style was Kempo, but lately we just changed it. And I'm gonna explain why in a second. Because my school was always based off what was happening at tournaments. So we were still teaching a lot of traditional forms and stuff like that. So I had to work through all of the traditional stuff in my martial arts career before going into extreme. But our school was very focused on competing. So all of the stuff that was happening to the circuit, we were trying to bring that. So if there was a modification in the trend of the way of doing traditional, we were doing that modification to our school as well, so that everybody was like up to date. So now we don't say that we do Kempo anymore, but we say we do sport karate, because what we teach is relevant to what's happening in the sport right now. So if a certain style or a certain form in the sport karate community is kind of like popular, and we know that the judges want to see it, that's what we more going to teach during the class. And we switch to kick also, so that the basic kick is round, hook, tornado. So it's a good start for tricking. So it's still like a basic background of traditional, but leading way easier to how sport karate is to the extreme side. So for me, I always being taught that way. I started with traditional, but it was really easy for me to just transit to CFX because of how we got teach. But yeah, that was pretty much it. And then just walking my way through. I would say though that in Quebec, sport karate is not as, say, evolved than in the US. So we see the concept and the trick and the trend and all of that stuff come like 2 to 3 years later in Quebec, and then it's not trendy anymore, you know. So, and I think it's a part of that reason is a part of people in Quebec are not really traveling to the US a lot, even though we have the internet to watch videos and stuff like that. You don't really understand what's happening in tournaments. So I think that might be a part of it. But I think right now it's way better than it was like 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were way back in sport karate. Like now we are more up to date. But 10 years ago, a form from 2010 in Quebec looked more like a form from the 20s in the US. It was really that. So that was the only hard part for me, because that like the way of teaching and the way of seeing sport karate in Quebec was really different. But as soon as I started traveling to US and doing the tournaments over there, I just adapt and change what I was doing. So
What would you suggest for someone who's like just starting out in CMX and they came from traditional martial arts? Like, what is like a skill they should really focus on first? Because for instance, for me, like when I first landed the 540, by the way, greatest feeling of all time when first landing it. But how do you like what would you suggest someone to focus on first if you're trying to go from traditional like chamber kick and recoil for a really traditional roundhouse kick to you have to start swinging it through, now lead into a tornado, now lead into this? Like, kind of walk me through.
let's see, because I think it depends for what you're aiming for. Depends if you're aiming more to go through weapon or through tricking. But I would say, especially for tricking, having a good martial arts like traditional background will help you a lot to get those clean kick during your combo, your kicks, your tricks, whatever. But I would say for the tricking part, just to the first part is really to create the step between traditional and the way that we kick in tricking, because it's slightly different. So keep going with the rotation after a kick, just figure out how the hip work and stuff like that, just to play around, watch video, and try to understand how they go from a traditional technique of a kick and how they do it in tricking, and just try to slowly transit your form from what you used to in traditional to the tricking side. And then for weapon, I would say just same thing. Try to keep the basic in, because if you're doing, like, let's take bow, for example. If you're doing strikes in a traditional form, the strike in your extreme form is going to be the same. So the pivot there is just about the transition, the behind the back pass, the end roll, the butterfly spin, the palm spin, all of that stuff. So it's really about taking the basic technique and then slowly start to integrate some CMX manipulation. So try to learn end rolls, butterfly spin, and not try to get into release too early, because I think if you how to say it, if you feel more comfortable playing around with your body and your bow before trying to get into some like experience release, then it's going to be easier for you to go and try those release. So I would say try to go for palm spin, end roll, neck roll, those kind of stuff first, and then you're more going to be able to understand the weight of the bow, the length of the bow, how you can control it. And then when you're going to go for release and harder stuff like that, it's going to be easier for you. So I would say those are the two sides. So that's the way I see it with bow, but obviously it's the same with comlet, chuck, sword. Just didn't take any example from those weapons. And then for tricking, I would say it's just about evolving what you already have and add the difficulty after. Because if you're doing a round kick, a traditional round kick, it's pretty much the same as a tricking round kick. I would say the tricker that doesn't do a real traditional round kick are doing it wrong, you know? So it's about taking that traditional background and just put it into extreme.
When you're making like a form, how do you make sure that all the judges are going to say like, this form is great? Because everyone has a different opinion on a great form. Do I need more traditional strikes? Let's just say this is weapons. Do I need more traditional strikes, or do I need more releases, or do I need to do more like tricks or kicks? Like, how do you like make that balance? Like, kind of walk me through how you make a form.
So, of course, it's going to be the balance that you need to make sure that it is great between striking and just trick overall. But a thing I have in mind when it comes to creating a form, there's actually three things I'm thinking about. First, are thing that the judges are looking at. You want to impress the judges at first. That's the most important thing. You want to make sure that the judges are looking at your form and they find it interesting. So whatever you do, you need to ask your question. Are they going to find that move interesting to give you a score of? Second thing is the crowd. That we want or not, the crowd's going to help you get that energy that the judge is going to notice that something is happening. So if there's a move that you don't necessarily think that the judge is going to appreciate that much, but that the crowd will, it's still a bonus for your form. So that's another thing you need to think about. And then the third one is for yourself. You need to have some move in your form that you're doing strictly because you like them and you feel comfortable with it. Because if you feel comfortable doing some trick, even though it's not necessarily because you want the judges to be impressed by it or the crowd, at the end of the day, they're still going to be impressed by it. And the crowd's going to get into it just because you feel so much comfortable doing those tricks. So it's really important having tricks in your form that you feel comfortable doing, that you want to put in, because it's going to be so much, you're going to feel like it's so much fun to just do the form afterward. But yeah, overall, I would say the balance that I give normally between striking and trick, I'm talking about releases, buddy roll, neck roll, palm spin, all of that stuff. I would say 60% strike, 40% trick. That's the balance I would give. just so that we keep the entire base of the form mainly traditional focus, but it's not too heavy on the new stuff, and it feels just like juggling, you know? You don't want to have that feeling in the form. You want to have that traditional background first, and then, look, I can still do some extreme as well. You have to have that balance. I don't think it should be a 50-50, otherwise it's going to be too packed. But close to 60-40, I think that's a good balance. And focusing on those three things, I'm always thinking about when creating a form. I think if you mix those two, it's just going to work well.
So it seems like to me, it's pretty formulaic. Like if you try to get someone in the room, it's like, hey, does this look cool? And they go do all the oohs and ahs, like wows, you're onto something, right? Was there ever a moment at a tournament, this probably happened early on, that your form was either too basic or way too complicated and it looked like a whole pile of mess? Like, have you ever had an instance where the form you had in your head was like, this is great, but in actuality, it's not that very good?
Yeah, I will give an example, and then it's going to link me to something else. But in 2017, I started to win in the black belts in NASKA. And then in 2018, throughout the beginning to like the middle of the year, for some reason, I did some changes in my form. Well, for some reason, I mean, we always have to just upgrade and do change in the form. But then throughout the middle of the year, I wasn't winning. And I wasn't happy with the form. And when I looked at it, I was like, it doesn't work. It's like less impressive than what I did 1 year ago. And then I started questioning myself. And then I was like, okay, let's go back, compare what I did 1 year ago and what I'm doing now. And it's going to come back to what I said earlier with the three things that you need to focus on: judges, yourself, and the crowd. And I was looking at my form and I was like, there's nothing for myself in that form. I just thought about a judge. I didn't thought about a crowd. I didn't thought about myself. The judge, I was trying to get a pattern that was impressive for the judges, but because I didn't have anything for the crowd and then the thing for myself, didn't work. So I went back, add tricks that I liked more, felt more comfortable with the form, could perform it more, felt better overall. You know, you could see that I was more engaged in the form and it was that much better. And I'm talking that 2018 at the end of the year now. So that's really a thing. You need to step back. It happens sometimes that you just perform a form in the tournament and it just doesn't work how you want it. So yeah, you take a step back, you analyze those stuff, you say, what did I do wrong? Did I do too much of that, too much of this, less of that, less of this? And then you just restructure your form. But to go back, what I wanted to lead to is that it could happen at tournaments that you do a form where you don't have enough or it's just a mess. And like I said, throughout the middle of the year of 2018, it was kind of weird. But I am the type of competitor that will use local tournament, not anymore, because I don't compete in locals. But when I was younger, I used to use local tournament as a test. I was trying new trick there before going into NASKA so that I could see what the reaction of the crowd would be. So I was trying, I was doing my form, and then I tried a new bow trick. And if everybody in like around the ring went crazy, I knew that was something I had to put in my form for the next NASKA event, you know? So I would say that's also a thing. If you want to analyze what you want to bring to your form at a certain level, that's a good thing. And for me, it was throughout local tournament. But sometimes people want their big trick to be thrown at locals. So they don't want to try it before. They don't want to try at locals for locals, okay? So it could be just simply by training. You have training groups. You're going to your school. You're doing your form. And you don't tell anyone. And then while training, you try that new move. And if everybody in your school that is sit around watching you do your form goes, oh, that was sick. You know you're into something, you know? So that's the same feeling. So definitely bring those elements of surprise while training or maybe locals. How depends on how you are where you at in your competition career. But for me, that's the tip I use to just gauge and try to get that balance in my form to see what trick people like and what they don't.
Yeah, I remember Jackson was mentioning to me about the Chris Angel, and he was telling me, it's like, it's really not that hard compared to like everything else. And I'm like, dude, that thing looks so cool. Like, I try to learn off of like him on YouTube trying to do it. And then I was like, okay, I can't figure it out. I gotta like ask someone directly how to do it step by step. And then I tried to do it, and I thought, okay, I can see why this is like easier on paper. And everyone looked at me, he's like, oh, Mia, that is so cool. Like, what were you doing? He's like, oh, it's like a move Jackson Rudolph did. And he like does this thing with his hand and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, it just shows that the audience's reaction, even if it's like a peer that's into martial arts, he knows what you're doing. If he's impressed, imagine some like person who has no clue what that thing's called, but they just like looking at it. And I think that's like the important part.
It's gonna sound off because I did drop on that move at the Capital Classic, but the trick that I dropped on this one that I dropped from the left shoulder and then I just let it slide and catch it later in my back. The first time I tried was at AK 2023, and it was more about just like playing around with my bow. There was nothing like crazy I wanted to try there. I was just like, oh, let's try this one. And then I heard a big reaction from that trick, and I was like, you guys like that? Like, okay, let's just like keep it in the form then. So yeah, definitely sometimes it's the easier trick that get the most recognition, just based on how they look, not necessarily on how hard they are. Because something can look good without necessarily being hard, and something can be hard without necessarily being looking good.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can't think of any tricks at the top of my head that is hard but doesn't look good. But I do agree. There's some tricks, like when I was like an 8-year-old and looking at someone doing like a finger roll on the kama, I was like, that is the coolest thing on earth. But then when you like work yourself up, you're like, okay, that's pretty basic. Like pretty like the easiest one, honestly.
I would say typically when you do something hard, it's gonna be cool. But what I wanted to say by it's hard but it doesn't look as cool is that, let's take an example of a trick, the asteroid, where you go behind the back, then you go close to your neck, and then you spin once and then catch. This trick with a 360, so with the asteroid, and then we go back here, it looks great. I've been training a lot when I was younger to do a double asteroid. So it was throwing my bow, going into my neck, and instead of just doing a 360, was doing to 720, then catch. Which I was able to land, but then visually, there was no difference between that trick and the one with a normal 360. So there was no reason for me, well, there was a difference, but not noticeable enough for how much difficult it was. So sometimes it's about just gauging on that, thinking about, okay, this trick is hard. Is it worth it for me to put it in the form? That's where I wanted to bring that. Like, sometimes some tricks are hard, but they don't look as good. You need to balance that. You need to balance the level of difficulty with how they look.
There's certain times in your form that you may have to like think on the fly, like as you're about to compete, it's like, oh, that guy was doing this, this, and this. Oh, I can like kind of tone it down on the spins or something if I know this is like what I'm seeing. So then how do you make sure that you prepared enough for that form or for those tricks? Like, is there anything specific you have to do in your training to make sure like, I'm comfortable with this, this is okay, I can definitely throw this in there?
I don't think that's every competitor that does that, but I'm the type of competitor that, let's take example again, my CMX weapon. I do not have only one version of that form. Well, first of all, my extreme weapon and my creative weapon are totally different, but let's just take the extreme weapon. I have like 4 to 5 version of that form. Nothing like too crazy of a change in the form, but some slight change that I know I can perform and I feel comfortable doing. So right before I go, if I see that the entire division went and I don't have any idea, but they all did. Let's see, Ben did a triple spin in this form. Okay. Well, I'm going to throw a triple spin in my form. You know, I'm not going to do double if you did triple. That's just how it worked. But I'm able to do those change right before stepping into the ring because I trained those little upgrades without necessarily thinking, okay, I will put that trick in my form for sure. Sometimes I will just hit the 720. But that 720, I have multiple variation. I have the one with the Peter Pan with the hand on my hip. I had the one with where I land into a stance, regular to the knee, or just combo. So that's already like 4 or 5 variation of the same trick. So depending on, during my training, I always train a different version. The release by themselves, I do them all 10 times. And then I do the other variation 10 times. And then so I'm used to do all of them. But when I'm doing in a training, I do one of them. And then I'm just used to throw out and throw in some trick. So when I go into the ring and I step in, I know I can do some adjustment compared to what my competitor did. So that's how I approach those little changes that you have in the form. You should be ready to have multiple options and switch them before you compete. Because also it works not only with the competitor, because there's some obvious stuff. Like I said, if someone did a triple, if I'm able to do a triple and I know I can lend it, there's no reason for me to not do a triple. But it could be other stuff. It could be related to the judges that you have in front of you. Some judges and prefer something that is less impressive but more clean, and some judges like when it's really flashy. So when you feel that throughout the day, you're going through the division and you feel like, okay, they really like the flash, I'll bring in something more in my form so they can give me the win. Or if I feel like, okay, every little mistake, they penalize a lot for them, and there's no way for me to win if I don't hit a perfect form, I won't throw as much, but I throw the form they want to see. So that's another thing. So adding multiple version can also help with that, with the panel of judges you have in front of you.
If the panel of judges in front of you, you know in the back of your head, like, oh, this guy kind of likes this more, or this guy kind of knocks me off a few points like last tournament. How do you think on the fly? Because personally, I would be like, okay, I gotta think about this really deeply. Because when you start to think about it too much, you tend to mess up somewhere. Because it has to be muscle memory at a certain point. How do you make sure you don't overthink, essentially?
That's a good question, though, because it did happen sometimes to overthink a trick. I would say, first of all, if you want to put in a trick in your form and you overthink it, don't put it in the form. That's the first thing. If you do overthink, let's take the same examples. Someone did a triple, and then I'm like, oh, I should do a triple. But instead of being like, okay, I will do a triple and that's it, if I start questioning myself and I'm not sure if I should do it and all that stuff, you should not do the trick, okay? Even if the other guy did a triple, you should not hit that triple because you're overthinking it and you're probably going to mess up. And you're probably not going to mess up on that triple because you overthink that triple. You're probably going to mess up on something before that triple because you're focused on what it was on that trick, you know? So that's the first thing. If you do overthink on a change, don't do the change. It's not worth it. But you should feel comfortable enough with the stuff you're bringing in and out in the form to just do another variation or just change the trick or go into another angle and add on. But if you don't do it. It's not worth it.
It's also you have a good support system behind you with Paul Mitchell and Jackson and all of them that they can maybe tell you last minute is oh, make sure you do this or make sure you do that, just in the back of your head, subconsciously, because I feel that your peers make a big impact on you, whether it's your competitors or it's just your classmates in regular training. What is your interaction or your experience with people in martial arts and your friends with all of them?
We have a really unique division right now in the adults because all of the top competitor, we are all friends. Which could be weird to some people, but for us, like especially with Ben Jones and Dawson Holt, I mean, we are aiming with each other at every tournament. So like, yeah, we are competing. We really want to beat each other when we are in the ring, but outside of the ring, we are close friends. So like, this feeling is, some people would call it weird because they would say, well, it's hard to focus. Do you really want to win or stuff like that? But no, when you step on the mat, the adrenaline kicks in and you just want to win. You're there because you're a competitor. You have that, you want to get that edge over everybody else. So even if we are really close friends outside of the ring, inside of the ring, we'll do anything that we can to win. But it's really fun because when we go to tournament, there's no hard feeling between anyone. Like we see each other, we dab up, and we're like, hey, yo, what's up? You know. So that's really good for us because we can train in a non-toxic environment and not think about revenge or whatever when we training. It's really training about yourself. And I think that's related to martial arts overall. You know, martial arts teach you respect, discipline, and being kind and respectful with everybody else. So when you go to a tournament, it shouldn't be different, you know? So keeping that respect, but you're a competitor. Normally, when you really want to compete and you have that drive, you want to win. So it's different on the mat. But outside, there's no hard feeling, you know? Everybody at the end of the day did what they had to do, and there's going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser. It is what it is.
What does it mean to be truly great in martial arts, in your opinion?
It depends when you look at it, because that's a really hard question, because people tend to categorize the like top competitor as GOAT. But it really depends on what you're looking at. Because let's take an example. If you think about CMX forms and weapon combined throughout the 10 or 20 last years, people would probably say that Matt Emick was the GOAT. But if we only take weapon, then people would probably say Rudy or Common. Even though Matt was there. And then if we go to form, there's going to be other names that's going to be thrown out there. And same thing now if you're going to try. So it's really, we have so many divisions that to be truly great at martial arts, I think first it depends on the point of view, because you could be great at martial arts without competing as well. You know, you could be great at martial arts and being like one of the best coach that the sport ever got. You know, so that's another factor. But if we only like stick to competitor, same thing. There's so many division. It depends on how you look at it. Do you talk about all around martial artists, or you talk about one specific division? But for me, I would say the top competitor, the one that for me are the greatest of all time, are really the one that were able to win in multiple divisions. It's really good to be able to be the best at one thing, but when you're able to be the best at multiple things, that's another skill. That's another skill of greatness. You know, it's just and that's why I started doing Kama, Bow, and I also do CMX Form, and I do Shred Weapon that I win sometimes. So being able to win with one weapon or the other, or in forms, or in trad, that for me is the definition of a great martial artist. If that responds to the answer you had, to the question you had in mind.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because when I think of like a great martial artist, I was a point sparrer guy, so I was always thinking of like the people that did point sparring. But then I thought, well, that's great and all, but like we can't forget the guys that do forms because that's like kind of like the yin and yang. Like you either fight or you either block. So why not just put them together? My thinking was always that if you're a good point sparrer, that's great, but let's see how like focused can you be in a form. But if you're really good at like forms and tricking, like can you actually like land a kick to the head or land a kick to the body? And I always kind of go back and forth. It's kind of like a tug of war.
And it's funny that you say that because not necessarily doing some fighting lately, but I did post a clip on Instagram of me hitting a pop 12 to like a pad. And the reason why I started doing that, doing kick on pad, I was like, I want to show people that my kicks are accurate. I can actually hit the targets, you know? So that was a thing that I had in mind. I was like, I don't want to just hit the kicks in the air. I want to actually be able to spot a target, hit the kick on that target. So I'm doing more pad kicking lately and stuff like that. It's not necessarily fighting or anything, but it's that much. It's a little bit more than what I can do with only tricking, you know?
How did you like become like the tricking guy on Instagram? Like what made you decide like social media was like the thing? Because that was my first time I ran into you. You popped on I think it was my Instagram feed, and I saw you were following all these other trickers and like, wait, this guy's new. And it was like during COVID. And then like, how did you decide like social media was like a good like medium to take on basically?
There's multiple answers to that. So the first one is simply getting on the map. And what I mean by that is that if you go on social media and you post a lot, there's a proof for people to go and see like, that's the guy I've been talking about, you know? So whatever the situation is, if you pull up my Instagram, you can see everything you need to see. So that was the first thing. I wanted to have a lot of content in. And by the way, there's probably going to be more content coming in other than Instagram. I'm not going to say more because I cannot really tell anything right now. But there's more content coming in. And yeah, that was the first thing. Just like having a proof of what I can do. Results of tournaments, my training, and just overall showing new tricks, new skills, and stay on the map. And then by doing that, I started to have some posts that had a little bit more views than others and stuff like that. And just, I felt that it could be a good opportunity for me to have that reach, to be able to talk to more people, express my martial arts in a way that I didn't think of, because creating more reels, because I'm mainly on Instagram, I mainly do the short content. I do the reels. So doing a lot more reels than just like one a week, trying to like keep it one a day. You have to think of doing your martial arts in different ways. So it's an opportunity for me to just train in different ways that I wouldn't have done without social media. So that's another thing that keep me going. And yeah, right now it's really for pure entertainment. Like that's the third thing. It's just like I like to do it. I like to post my training. I like to get up there, get the comments, chat with people. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, because I remember like seeing you like 2 or 3 years ago on Instagram, and then I look at you now. There's like a lot of growth now. Even though like back then you're still like crazy good, but no one can really tell that someone can get better. And it's so easy just to pull up a clip being like, this was Esteban in 2021. Now this is now. Let's see like how his tricks look. Oh, his backflip's cleaner, or this is better, or whatever.
It's also motivation for me. Like if I post the same clip as, or the same combo as a year ago, and there's no improvement, I mean, I'm gonna be ashamed of posting it. You know what I mean? Not really, but like it's still there. If you train a kick and you think about the one time you posted the exact same combo, you want to see some improvement. So yeah, of course, it gives me motivation to just get better. So yeah, that's a part of it.
Now we're starting to wrap up on the podcast. What are some like tips you would give to someone who wants to start martial arts, like what advice would you give to young people trying to get into the sport or already have been in the sport?
First step, show up. If you don't show up, nothing's going to happen. If you do show up, then anything can happen, okay? I was that kid from Quebec that didn't know that martial art that evolved that much over the last 10 years. And now I'm one of the best adult competitor on the NASKA circuit in the US. Anything that you put your mind into, if you really work hard and you really set those goals, and you don't only set those goals, you set goals that are higher than those goals, then at some point, those goals that were lower than that, you're going to hit them easily. And then you're just going to reach for something that is higher than that, and then higher than that, and then higher than that. And just going to keep climbing until you become, if the goal is to become one of the best, there's no reason why you couldn't. If you want to train, if you want to grind, if you want to do all of that stuff, you can. The first thing is, like I said, show up. If you don't train, you don't put your mind into, you don't do your video study, you don't know history about sport karate, it's not magically going to be, you're not magically going to become the guy, if that's what you want. But if you just want to get started into a sport, but same thing, I'm going to give the same advice. Show up. If you want to get started and you don't train, you're never going to get started. So whatever the end goal is, first thing, show up, be there, do your training, start getting a little bit more involved with the sport, do video study. And that's also a thing for me that is really important. Video study is like one of the things I do the most. Like there's probably 1 or 2 hours a day that I just sit in front of my computer and I watch forums. And I watch other forums, and I watch other forums, and I keep going that way. And the reason is, well, there's multiple reasons. First, creativity, watching old clips or new clips, combining them together and just create a new concept. It's easier when you have inspiration. So, first of all, this is great. Second, watching clips going to give you motivation. You keep your mindset into the sport karate. So by watching a lot of content about sport karate, you're going to think it more. And then when you're going to go train, you're going to be more motivated. So I would say I could keep going on saying why video study is great, but I'll stick to those two. And I think last thing I could say about someone that wants to get into martial arts or had set goals that want to get, I would say a lot of people gonna tell me, I heard that a lot, I don't have the motivation to train. How you do it? I don't always have the motivation to train. I have the dedication to train. I have that mindset that even if I don't want to show up and I don't want to train, I go there anyway and I train anyway. It's about being consistent. If you have that dedication to show up and you have that consistency, you're going to see some growth. So I would say it's normal that some days is harder than others, but you just have to keep going. And if you're able to do that, then you're going to be able to achieve big things.